Good evening, everyone. This is the regularly scheduled meeting of the Board of Estimate Taxation, July 20th, 2009. This also marks the 100-year anniversary of the BET. I see that most in the crowd tonight was able to join us this morning for our celebration of this historic event. We did note this morning that, in fact, we do have a list of BET members that we continue to work on to ensure that it is accurate. In fact, a couple of the former members of the BET corrected me relative to some of the names and when they served. But we hope to have our biennial dinner in December and invite back all former and current BET members to help celebrate the 100 years of BET in the town of Greenwich. I would note also for this occasion we have Sam Stoll, former both budget chair and chair, with us tonight. So thank you, Sam, for coming. Before we begin also the consideration of applications, our fleet director, Betty Link, asked to say a few words.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and ladies and gentlemen of the BET. This time I come before you not to ask for more money, but to thank you and the current members and the past members for all your support through the years. I've tried to bring some innovative ideas to the town, which you have supported. New fleet maintenance program, automated fueling system, outsourcing the parts room. And now we no longer go and kick tires on the vehicles. We have a 5, 10, and 50-year replacement program. The stipend, which was so important to my men for the ASE program to get their certification, and the upgrades that was started a couple of years ago. And soon to be open is going to be the car washing facility. And I think you've shared with me the professionalism that I have tried to bring to the fleet department. As our first selectman, Mr. Tessie, said when he did my press release, he talked about the professionalism and the importance of finding my replacement with a professional person, and that's what I've tried to do. I did do the outcome-based budget, as you know, for a few years, and we do use some of those tools that I developed for benchmarking. So again, thank you all very much for having supported me through these 19 and a half years.
And Betty, thank you for your service to the town. We now are moving on to routine applications. Madam Clerk?
Yes, good evening. I'd like to move routine applications number PR1 for Parks and Recreation, additional appropriation of $24,692. HD1 for Health, approval to use, $61,030. PW1 for the Department of Public Works, interim appropriation for $40,000. NW4, Nathaniel Witherall, transfer of $120,000. FI2, Finance Administration, transfer of $25,000. SE3 for Selectmen, approval to use for $20,370. Again, I so move, and I also will note that NW4 and FI2 are fiscal year 2008-2009 line item adjustments. Thank you.
It's been moved by Ms. Tarkington.
Second.
Second by Mr. Mason. Discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? 12-0-0. Moving on to the non-routine applications, Mr. Mason, our budget chair.
Good evening and happy birthday to the BET again. PW2 is for Department of Public Works. It's a release of conditions for $250,000, and I so move the item.
Second. Moved by Mr. Mason, second by Mr. Simon. Discussion.
Mr. Chair, this is the first step in the town's plan towards a cohesive town-wide plan for some of our drainage issues that we have. And we had with us that night our Commissioner of Public Works, Amy Siebert, was there, and I would offer at this time, I think, we have a presentation for the board on this item.
Mr. First Selectman, please.
Good evening. Happy birthday again. You look pretty good for 100.
I keep waiting for the balloon.
Tonight I am before you to request a release of conditions on an approved appropriation of $250,000 to permit our Department of Public Works to continue to the progress we have made on stormwater control. The mitigation of the problems that stormwater creates in so many neighborhoods of the town is one of my administration's highest priorities. As we all know, this is a very complex subject that not only affects our residents, but confronts us with many new and challenging issues. Among these are what work needs to be done, what should be done first, who should pay, and how will we put together a plan that is fair and will survive the test of time. These and many other questions have been discussed and considered by the Flood and Erosion Control Board. The board has been assisted by staff of our Department of Public Works and a number of outside consultants who have worked with us on this subject. During the last several years, we have budgeted over $1.5 million to permit the completion of stormwater master plans to chart our waterways and to prepare a systematic plan for addressing the problems of flooding. The town has been assessing the hydraulics of our major river systems and their ability to handle storm flows under current and full build-out conditions. These studies identified potential improvements to address flooding. Study areas to date include Byram, Strickland, Brothers Brook, and Cider Mill, Binney Brook. The areas of town that are south of the town's riverine watersheds, which are referred to as coastal, are also being studied. In these areas, the focus is on the drainage network and its ability to convey flows to the sound. The capacity of smaller drainage networks to convey stormwater to a receiving water body are also being evaluated where known problems exist. Old Greenwich and the Church Street, Sherwood Place areas have already been studied. Some smaller drainage evaluations, such as Pemberwick Park, Pemberwick Road, Riversville Road near Mayfair, and Coscob Avenue have also been reviewed. The result of all these studies has been the creation of a plan for going forward. They have allowed us to prepare a list of potential capital improvements to provide increased protection to areas within the watersheds. Typically, these are areas in the floodplains, adjoining rivers, or in a limited area where drainage capacity requires evaluation. These potential projects can then be evaluated to determine their priority and a cost-benefit assessment completed to permit us to rank them with respect to other needs across the town. Our Department of Public Works has built on all the techniques employed by many other municipalities throughout the nation, as well as utilizing our existing capital project ranking system to develop a stormwater project prioritization process. This effort has been done in conjunction with our Flood and Erosion Control Board, internal agencies, town administration, and public input from the Flood and Erosion Control Board meetings. DPW has also worked with staff from the town's emergency responders, including GEMS, fire and police, to evaluate potential projects. This has resulted in a process where those projects which represent a significant public safety improvement, such as protecting a major transportation route or critical infrastructure, such as communications, electrical, structural, etc., are given the highest priority. The culmination of this lengthy process has been that the Church Street, Sherwood Place, and the Brothers Brook projects have been identified as two critical elements in our stormwater plan. They are the subject of tonight's release of funds, and I urge your support. Before I complete my remarks, I would like to state that merely identifying where we have existing problems and establishing a priority system for going forward does not do justice to the efforts of the Flood and Erosion Control Board, Department of Public Works, and our land use agencies to reduce future stormwater problems. As you know, DPW has been working on updating the town's drainage manual and reviewing our existing ordinances and work processes that may also need to be modified. This has required a cooperative effort with the various land use agencies and others. Many of these drainage issues that residents are particularly interested in may be addressed through an update to our drainage manual and possible changes to other town regulations. Staff from DPW, Inland Wetlands Watercourses Agency, Conservation, P&Z, and Health have been working together to discuss and determine the direction that the drainage manual will take. This has included concepts such as low-impact design, permit approaches, and other potential changes to reduce the likelihood of off-site surface drainage projects. Some changes can be addressed via the drainage manual, while others may require P&Z to modify its regulations. In summation, I urge your support for the release of funds to permit DPW to move forward on the Church Street, Sherwood Place, and Brothers Brook projects. It is our first step on a long road of work. It has been well planned, and it promises to lead us in a direction that will reduce the impact of stormwater on the lives of our residents. I want to thank you for your patience in not only this report tonight, but what you heard at the Budget Committee. And I know our Commissioner, Amy Siebert, is here, along with Tony McLeod, Chairman of the Flood and Erosion Control Board, to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you. Discussion from the members of the BET. Mr. Kremick.
Yeah, I just want to find out in the future what the procedure is going to be. Will the Flood and Erosion Control Board be recommending drainage projects through the CPI so that it'll be incorporated into the ordinary budget process? Because this year is, I realize this is the first of the first two projects under this program, but in the future it's going to be part of the budget process, and it's going to be through the board to the CPI, and then it'll be ranked with our other capital projects?
That is,
Just hold on.
that
I
is
just want to
correct.
clarify things for the body. Do you mean the CIP or the
I know-
because there
Sorry,
are because there's another acronym out there of CPI or something out of
CIP, I'm sorry.
out of the Plan of Conservation and Development. There's another acronym I think that uses CPI. So I just want to make sure everybody's on the same page.
CIP. CPI was an inflationary moment in my,
I was interpreting you to mean CIP, but thanks for that.
the capital improvement, whatever P stands for.
I knew what you meant. Yes, I think that's a very valid point to raise in terms of process. On a go-forward basis, the detailed analysis and work is done through the Department of Public Works in conjunction with the Flood and Erosion Control Board. They have done the due diligence and analysis to rank according to the standards established under their new criteria, which was referenced tonight in terms of the two projects that are part of the top, say, 6. And then that must, again, go into the full townwide capital improvement process and compete with all other issues that are before the town. That is currently what is envisioned at this moment. And, certainly, again, it's a process that has been in its infancy in terms of making this a critical priority need. I don't know if you want to add anything.
One of the, if I may, one of the questions that has been raised for the past several months regarding these projects is level of public input and especially with respect to the Flood and Erosion Control Board. So I just want to touch upon that for a minute. Do you envision coming forward in, say, February, when the budget process is being worked through, that there will be a plan, and I'm going to use the analogy of a paving. We have a pavement management system where we're able to lay out all of the projects and say this is the way we're going to handle paving, and if we allocate X number of dollars per year, we should be able to maintain that process, right? Do you envision coming in February with that, being able to lay that out, or is that premature, and are you really looking maybe to the following February to do that, February of 2011, in terms of taking that spreadsheet that you showed us last Tuesday and saying, okay, there's $100 million worth of projects on here that fits into our CIP,
Our 50-year plan.
our 50-year plan, right? I mean, or whatever it is, and we should be looking at ways of trying to finance this. Do you think you're going to have that ready for this February, or is that a discussion that's going to happen a year from February?
Do you
Well,
wanna
I
go
think,
ahead, Peter?
well, I would just say that all of the work that's been done by the Flood and Erosion Control Board to date and now presented to you will ultimately have to go before the full Capital Improvement Project Committee as items are requested from that, so they get the full magnitude of the work that's been done. That has not taken place yet. So, as you submit requests for funding for particular projects, you give background material. I envision that the work that's been done to date has to be presented to every member of the Capital Improvement Projects Committee so they can understand, as you are, the magnitude of the work in the issue before us. Up until now, it's been anecdotal in terms of cost. I know the figure $100 million was thrown out by Lloyd Hubbs when he was here. I think this is much more precise, and it's like a lot of the projects that come before us, you have an initial estimate, you have preliminary work gives you a more finite number. And the point you're ready to go to construction, you have more precise amounts of capital need.
Ms. Barton, and then we'll come to Mr. Krummick.
Yeah, I've been working with Amy Siebert and others on these projects for a while now, and I view the process that we're going through now as laying the groundwork for what Mr. Walko was asking for, to take a couple of projects, get them through the design and engineering stage, so we can then have a good fix on how much it will cost to do even just two fairly geographically limited projects, and what downstream, so to speak, complications there might be, so that as we move forward in time, we can be better educated as to how much these projects will cost, how much we can bite off at one time. We're going to have to do a lot of work on how to finance these projects. These are not small in either individually or collectively. And I view the work that's been done by the Flood Erosion Control Board and the DPW up till now as being essential to the groundwork for moving forward. And I commend you for coming in with two projects that are ready to move forward.
So in order to control the flow of these projects, to follow her analogy, they are going to go through the CIP process. In other words, now that you've worked and you've put together a list of priorities and or projects, and you've ranked them, I don't pretend to know whether that's a complete list or not. But when you come to fund them, you're going to come not like the asphalt program where we do a certain amount of asphalt every year, but you're actually going to come with specific projects that will be vetted through the CIP process.
Yes.
Okay.
I don't know if you want to add anything, Amy.
I think, Steve, you asked the question, are we going to have information to talk about this spring? And the answer is yes, and I think the answer is the following year, there will be even more to talk about, to give you the short answer, because we continue to do the master plans for other parts of town, so that means this list will grow, and projects, will then get evaluated against each other even as we do this. But we did want to get started. I think one of the things that Peter pointed out and what he was talking about is we're trying to get started with the projects initially that are those that can impact public safety. And a lot of those other projects that we're addressing, those below-the-line, nice-to-do projects, we're going to have to look at a lot harder, maybe do more research, gather more information as we continue to evolve a multi-year, really long-term capital plan for those areas.
Steve. Ms. Tarkington?
Yes, Ms. Siebert, I think. One of the things that came up at the Budget Committee meeting earlier this week is really also, as you take on these projects, to see if there's an understanding of what caused these particular flooding problems, and if there are issues that need to be addressed, say planning and zoning or inland wetlands regulations that need to be adapted or modified to mitigate any risk of additional problems arising. So as you take on these projects, will you be sort of looking beyond the project itself to its cause? And, I know, but at least addressing or trying to understand the underlying causes so that we can go back and work with other departments if necessary?
Well, I think what you're talking about is being addressed with a lot with our drainage manual work. Some of the things that we do look at when we do these master plans, we look at what we'll need with a full build-out. Obviously, Public Works can't suddenly turn around and say, well, you need to change all your regs because you don't like what's going to happen at full build-out, but that is information we work with the land use departments. But I think the drainage manual will be getting at some of the issues that people have been focusing on parcel-to-parcel issues. A lot of the projects we're looking at, especially when you're looking at riverine flooding or some of these larger drainage systems and networks, are not necessarily affected, by one parcel or two parcels. They're large systems that are just impacted by the growth that's happened over years in town.
Well, I understand that, but on the other hand, just take the Sherwood Church Street project. The sources of the springs or whatever are within, say, 1,000 feet, which I think are, or maybe just beyond that. So there are issues that maybe can be considered without necessarily, and that may not apply to the drainage manual, but you may learn as you work on these particular two projects. I mean, both of them I'm familiar with because both of them happen to be within my district. Thank you.
Mr. Stone?
Amy, just for the record, and I know we got into this a little bit the other evening in the Budget Committee meeting, but if you just review the point about sequencing the studies that you're going to be doing. I mean, you're focusing right now on two projects, which are two out of a significantly larger potential number, and without having gone into those on a thorough analysis, there's the possibility, which I believe you've already addressed in an earlier meeting, that we could be addressing two projects and funding remediation of those particular problems that might in turn be impacted by other projects yet to be done. In other words, putting some good money that might have to be, let's call it, surpassed by projects in the future to remediate other problem areas that you're not yet in possession of all the facts on. So the question is, how comfortable are you that these particular projects that you're proposing or you intend to propose that we go forward on now can stand on their own without having an impact on other projects, other flood control projects yet to be done in the future that you haven't had a chance to study yet?
I think if I can make sure I understand your question, you're asking, is it worthwhile to do these projects given that there might be a more important project in the future? Is that?
It's not a case of the importance. These are part of a system, as I've understood it in the past, or it could well be part of a system that you might be addressing a part of that system, and without having a chance to analyze the entire system remediation, you might be putting some money toward projects that might, in the future, in future years, turn out to be money not well spent at this point in time because of other parts of that system that you'll have remediated going forward.
Okay, I think I understand your question, which is are we going to get value out of both of these, even if we do additional work on, say, on Brothers Brook or something in the future? For both of these projects, the first project on Brothers Brook, it's a reasonably small project, and we need to do it regardless of what else we do to Brothers Brook to alleviate some of the flooding at Route 1. It won't alleviate all of it, but it would still be an improvement. So that's a pretty simple, definitely standalone project for
and
church.
It's definitely standalone.
Yeah, that can stand on its own. It's, as I said, it's not going to be it doesn't cure everything, but it certainly provides, some good alleviation of some of the conditions on that area. And for Church Street and Sherwood, that's also part of a drainage network that we need to enlarge and grow. And it's a reasonably, what's the word I'd like to use, not an enormous drainage network. It's not so interconnected with other things that we see a big issue with upsizing it at this point based on what we know about that area. So I still think that is a reasonable project. I think that answers your question. I don't see something in the future that suddenly means we're going to have to go in and do it over again, if that's maybe what the question is.
Essentially. So no future project, as far as you know right now, might conceivably have an impact on the way you address the particular remediation that you have in mind here.
Not for that location.
Okay.
If we find it, we'd have to make them pay for it, wouldn't we?
Ms. Barton?
Could one of the three of you address the question of what's going on with the Army Corps of Engineers and the Byram River? I read that the funding had been lost or not passed or was deferred or something.
I can give you what I found out since Thursday. This is a project that has been in discussion, organized by a group of people in the community in Pemberwick for, I guess, a couple years, at least 2 years, maybe 3. The request for funding of the federal government was initiated with Congressman Shea's office. At the time it was initiated with Congressman Shea's office, from what Commissioner Siebert has told me, it also was submitted to Senator Lieberman's office. When the new Congress took over, there was a transition. The application was submitted to Congressman Himes, but a new application was not submitted to Senator Lieberman. Now, this is a project that was coordinated with the Conservation Director and the Commissioner of Public Works. Ms. Siebert came into her position in August of 2008, and Ms. Savageau, I believe, acted as really a conduit, having been involved with the neighborhoods there through the 2007 flooding issues and so forth, and helped with the collaboration on that. The realities are, in talking to the Army Corps, not specific to that project, but just overall, is, Greenwich, in terms of the big picture, is challenged to receive funding. We know that the Congressman's office has done their best to elevate the importance, certainly being from Greenwich. I would hope that carries a bit of clout, knowing the area firsthand, but we are going back in next year. This is not unusual in terms of having to go back a couple times to get the funding. Many of these projects are perceived to be earmarks, and we all know the connotation that earmarks have developed through the years. We happen to know them as very valid public projects, public need projects. Someone in Tulsa, Oklahoma may look at something in Greenwich, Connecticut as being pork. I mean, I'm not down there, but that's the sense that I've gotten. So I'm confident that through the leadership of not just the town, but Congressman Himes' office and our senators, we'll have a chance to get some funding next year. On the other side of the equation, we were approved for some funding for dredging that went through both congressional and senatorial offices. Has not yet been voted out, as far as I know, the Senate yet. So. Simple answer, I think change in administrations, in lack of understanding in process, most likely resulted in maybe a deferral this year.
My question was less who's responsible for it slipping through, whatever it slipped through, but we're still pursuing the federal funds, and we want the Army Corps to do that analysis rather than doing it ourselves?
Yeah, do you want to answer that, Tony? You want the Army Corps to do it because the recommendations, frankly, may not be substantially different from what we saw many years ago when the Corps looked at this. And when you look at the options you have, which are to build levee structures or to elevate homes or to turn neighborhoods back into parks and things like that and relocate, the funding that you're looking for from that, you're looking for federal funding for the solutions because they're very costly solutions for something of this nature. So that's why you'd like to go through the Corps process.
I have one last question on this item. So one of the criticisms that have come forward over the past couple of years regarding flooding is the ability of the people to access the Flood and Erosion Control Board and their meeting schedule. So how does the Flood and Erosion Control Board play in this process? And does the CIP take the place of the Flood and Erosion Control Board relative to public input and public hearings? Vis-a-vis, we now have a list of projects that I suspect that once it gets disseminated, you're going to have a lot of chatter about and communication about I think the top of the line, I doubt you'll have a lot of discussion over, because I think people recognize the public safety aspect of that. But it's not in the too distant of a future where we're going to start talking about everything below the line, and people are going to want to talk about rankings and objectivity and subjectivity and where that is. So I just want to understand how we intend to address that, and if the Flood and Erosion Control Board has thought about that vis-a-vis the chart that came out and now is a public document, or will it simply be through the CIP process for public input?
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Tony McLeod. I'm the chairman of the Flood and Erosion Control Board. And in terms of public input, we have a public comment session at every meeting. We have traditionally met quarterly. We have addressed the issue of meeting more frequently, but up until fairly recently, and I would say by recently, let's say the last quarter of 2008, our CDM, which is the outside engineering consultant, which was performing the stormwater drainage studies, was basically on a work pattern and had their plates full getting us sufficient information for quarterly meetings. So we could have met more frequently but not had that much to discuss. In terms of public input, we have had considerable public input from various members of the community, and when I say members, it would be town-wide. There are folks in Byram and Pemberwick. There are people in central Coscob, in the Strickland Brothers Brook area. There are a couple of different places in Old Greenwich where there are folks who live in flood-prone areas. And needless to say, everybody who lives in a flood-prone area believes sincerely and rightly that their area is the one that is most deserving of attention. One of our concerns on the Flood and Erosion Control Board has been to basically assure that when Greenwich starts to spend money on flood control improvement projects, that in so doing, the town, on a town-wide basis, gets the biggest bang for its flood control buck. So consequently, that's why in November of 2006, we asked for a prioritization study to be done that encompassed the entire town. We didn't want to just listen to people from one area of town and see who presented their arguments either most frequently or most eloquently, however the case may be. We wanted outside objective judgment to be brought to bear on the projects that should be undertaken first. And that is basically what you have approved over the last couple of years in putting forward the money that has financed these studies. Without having these studies, we would have not had the updated information that is necessary to come up with good plans. And in that regard, I'd like to thank you for enabling us to go forward. I think we are at this point at a, if you want to put it this way, it's kind of an exciting point for the Flood and Erosion Control Board, because now we can actually start taking input from these studies and make the recommendations that are resulting in this request tonight.
Mr. Kremick.
So in answer to the chairman's question, and to reinforce the fact how exciting it's going to be on the Flood and Control Board.
I didn't say it would be exciting to be on the board. But,
for future, well, your meetings are going to be a lot more interesting, because for future capital projects that are going to go to the CIP, they're going to come through your board. So your board is going to have to set up public input before the CIP process in order to make recommendations.
Well, as I said, we do have public input at all meetings. I envision having a meeting at which we, and the rankings that we have proposed, both in terms of the methodology and also how things have fallen out in those rankings to date have been public information. They have been revealed, so to speak, at our meetings. And, they're available for public comment by anybody who attends. And we have had some fairly good attendance at our meetings. I would envision going forward that we will probably have, sessions which are devoted entirely to public comment, and we'll see what we get. In terms of the capital improvement program, I think our function is more to tee up these recommendations, and then I think others will take over from there and put it through the normal paces that any capital improvement proposal would go through. I'd invite Peter to say more on that.
Mr. Kelly?
Could I just ask you, when do you meet?
We meet quarterly. Our next meeting is on Thursday. This Thursday. It's generally the third Thursday.
Mornings or evenings?
They are at 3:30 in the afternoon, or 3 o'clock, I should say.
See, I would just note some problematic observation with the time frame that you meet at 3:30, especially for individuals who work.
Yeah.
So I appreciate your comment that you may have sessions where the public could just come and comment, and I might recommend that maybe you do some of those in the evening.
I would agree. Thank you.
Thanks.
Further discussion? Thank you all for coming. And Chairman, thank you for being here tonight. All those in favor of PW2 signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? 12-0-0. The next two items, SE1, SE2, will be presented by our Law Committee, I believe, Nancy Barton. Ms. Barton.
SE1 is a proposed settlement of a litigation called Interstate Flagging versus Walters. The settlement amount is $5,000. The case involves a Town of Greenwich policy to use police officers rather than private flaggers on certain construction projects involving our roads where traffic may be affected. The view is that this is a weak case, but the settlement amount is less than the cost of trial. And this settlement was approved by the Law Committee by a vote of 2-0 on June 26, 2009, and I move this item for approval.
It's moved by Ms. Barton.
Second.
Second by Mr. Campbell. Discussion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? 12-0-0.
SE2 is another litigation settlement in the case called Lauersdorf versus the Town of Greenwich, also in the amount of $5,000. This is a claim by an employee of the Parks and Rec Department arising out of the incident from several years ago where a swastika sign was placed on his desk. He alleged discrimination and harassment based on national origin. The settlement amount, again, is less than the cost of defense and was approved by the Law Committee by a vote of 2-0 on June 26, 2009, and I move approval of this item.
Moved by Ms. Barton.
Second.
Second by Mr. Campbell. Discussion. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? 12-0-0. Item 3 now comes before us, the assessor's report. Our town assessor, Ted Courtney, assistant town assessor, Bob Shipman. Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the board, and congratulations on your 100th birthday. You have my report. Be prepared to answer any questions that you have about it.
Questions for our town assessor. Mr. Finger.
Can you turn on your mic?
Thank you, sorry. Ted, with regard to item number 3 in your report, specifically the mishap with the motor vehicle bills going to wrong addresses, how large a problem is that?
It's not a large problem, but it's a reoccurring problem, and I've scheduled a meeting for this Thursday afternoon at 2 o'clock to raise this with some of the other departments to see if we can come to a correction of this problem.
And is it safe to assume that if an individual who did not receive their bill because it was sent to a wrong address, and for some reason that bill was not forwarded back to the town or found its way to the proper party, that if that bill went unpaid, that there would be some relief granted to that person when they're notified that they have a past due bill?
That's really a question for the tax collector.
Ms. Tarkington and Mr. Kremick.
Yes, Mr. Courtney. Under your point number 9 on staff education, you indicated here that 2 staff members had attended a webinar, but the topic was interesting, the impact of foreclosed properties on assessment valuations. Was it either you or Mr. Shipman, one of the 2 people, and can you share, maybe a couple sentences on what you learned from this?
I attended with one of our residential appraisers, and the discussion was centered on residential properties. There were 4 nationally known speakers, and the webinar basically was where many assessors from the state gathered in Waterbury at an auditorium where we could actually see the discussion taking place. And the decisions varied, but I think that the general consensus is that if there are a lot of foreclosure sales in an area, that it will have impact upon values, and it will have to be recognized by the assessors.
Thank you.
Mr. Kremick.
I note in your report that the final number of seniors who were eligible for tax relief under our ordinance who granted any relief came to 297 seniors. Do you have any idea what it would have cost to provide the tax credits to those 297 seniors?
Just a broad estimate, I think that it probably could have been held with the original figure of the $1 million.
In other words, if we on the BET had fully funded the program within the cap in the ordinance, that we would have covered everybody.
Probably so.
Mr. Stone.
Ted, on your grid, where you go through the reasons why tax credits may not have been granted, there's one section here called incomplete applications. The one showing it seems to have been an increasing number over the last several years. Is it fair to assume that your staff, when you find an application that may not have been complete, because again some of them were fairly complex, does your staff try to deliver assistance to those that are submitting an incomplete application?
Yes, we do. And generally, we help people, anyone who has questions or problems. In the cases of the incompletes this year, we did send 3 letters out announcing the program and announcing the fact that they were missing certain items and reminders. And there were a lot more incompletes than the 10 that got disqualified.
Originally incomplete that you've been able to diminish.
Yes.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Ted, quick question on the update of the reval for 2010. Was enabling legislation passed that would allow us to put this off to 2011?
Yes, it was passed and signed by the governor. Thus far, the assessors did a survey. There's only been a few communities that have taken up on this deferral. Most of them are continuing with their plans that were in place.
When do you think you would be in a position to make a recommendation to this body? When's sort of the drop dead date that we need to make a decision as to whether or not we continue to go forward with the 2010 reval or push it off to 2011?
Not later than November of this year.
Okay.
One good sign I'll just mention is that we've had a very limited number of sales, but during the last 2 months, both May and June, the sales are now becoming more appropriate to what we've had in prior years.
Mr. Campbell?
Yeah, I was going to ask you along those lines. I think the June sales are more than half of the 3-year average, and I think we'll find that July is going to be the same. So far in July, we're above half of the 3-year average. But if that continued, if it was at that level, and you saw that through November, is that enough activity for you to recommend that we do the revaluation?
I think that if we see the sales continuing and we're able to see the patterns from the sales, that I would recommend that we go ahead with the revaluation. So I think we're on the right track, but I think we should hold off making the decision until we get through the summer and the early fall.
Further questions? Ted, thank you. Do I have approval for the assessor's report? Moved by Ms. Tarkington. Second by Mr. Finger. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? 12-0-0. Item 4 now comes before us, BET Committee and Special Project Team reports. You should have received in your packet the OPEB Trust Board and the ad hoc OPEB Committee reports. The Audit Committee report, the Glenville School Building Committee, Nathaniel Witherell Town Building Committee report, Human Resources Committee report. Any other questions or comments relative to those reports? Mr. Norton.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to comment on the Glenville School Building Committee, which has its next meeting tomorrow morning. The materials that we have been presented for that meeting indicate that the building is 72% complete as of a week ago.
My understanding on that committee that the Plan A, I guess if you want to call it, is for the students to move in over the Thanksgiving break, and Plan B is to have the students move in over the Christmas break. Is that true?
That's going to be discussed tomorrow.
Are those the two plans?
I haven't seen the plans. I mean, I think that that's basically hearsay. I have not, they were not in the package submitted to us, other than just the item for discussion was.
Where there's smoke, there's fire a lot of times, so we'll see.
Right.
Any other comments or questions for the reports? Very well. Item 5 now comes before us, the Comptroller. Peter Menarson. Good evening.
Good evening and happy birthday. I have 3 quick points and I'll open up to questions. Page 1 under Nathaniel Witherell, first paragraph, last sentence, where it talks about the August 4th site visit. Health Dimensions Group is going to be interviewing officials at Nathaniel Witherell from approximately 8 or 9 in the morning till 4. And then at 4 p.m. they are going to interview myself and hopefully a few BET members. So the 4 o'clock to 5 or 6 o'clock slot is opened up to non-Nathaniel Witherell members for an exit conference. Okay.
Let me just stop you there though for a second. So we now have a committee that I'll mention in my officer's report. One of the things, if you could get from HDG, is whether or not the BET members will be needed or should be there for any of the interviews or examinations before that 4 o'clock time frame would be helpful. Obviously, spending the day up there I don't think necessarily would be productive, but if there is a time frame or slot that it would be better for the 4 BET members to also be present at other than their own interview, that would be helpful information for us.
Yes, okay. Second point, page 2, right above the risk management notation, the last paragraph for retirement. The retirement board is meeting this Thursday, July 23rd, and the actuaries, EFI actuary representative Gregory Stump will be making a presentation, and we'll get our first glimpse at the most talked about item in the budget for 10-11. It's the annual required contribution. So Mr. Norton and Mr. Simon attend as liaisons. If anyone else is interested, we'll get a preliminary number, hopefully, on the ARC for 10-11 for the pension contribution. And then finally, and I'll open it to questions, right below that in the risk management, we were successful in renewing all the insurance policies collectively, and we saved about $75,000 under budget. And I'll open up any questions.
Mr. Norton.
Yes, could I go back to the prior comment, Peter, in regard to the actuarial report? We will only be dealing with the May 31st figures, is that correct?
He has the flash report through June 30th. However, there's a lag in the alternatives. They're only through March 31st, and as we all know, they are lagging behind some of the other investments.
Further questions for the comptroller? Mr. Simon.
So, for Nathaniel Weatherall, it's required, or we have to set up a separate bank account for them? We just can't
Yes.
keep accounting? We just can't keep track of this from an accounting point of view?
No, it's required. The Department of Social Services has been pressing us for a number of years to set up a different account, and being that we've had it in the general fund for all prior years, when we broke away and spun off and became a special revenue, also known as revolving fund, they're requiring it, that we have a separate accounting in the form of uncommingling, or not commingling the funds. So yes, it is required.
So you're going to pay bills from this fund also?
Yes.
Further questions or comments? Ms. Tarkington.
Can you just give us an idea on Nathaniel Weatherall's insurance costs, since they came to us and spoke about their costs? You mentioned that you had completed the insurance contracts and can you break out Nathaniel Weatherall?
I can't, through memory,
Okay.
I did, there's 20 to 30 policies. I think we're down below 285,000. I don't know what the final figure is, but I can email that to everyone.
Right, and Weatherall, we might just,
And it has been declining over the last 2 or 3 years.
thank you.
And this is the first year that we've put it in sync with all the other insurance policies. Previously, it was, I can't remember if it was March 1st or April 1st, but it was out of sync with the rest of the policies.
No, I remember, because I think it made a difference in their numbers last year because of that change. Thank you.
Further questions or comments? May I have a motion to accept the comptroller's report?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Stone, second by Ms. Tarkington. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstention. Item 6 now comes before us, the treasurer's report. Is there a motion to approve the treasurer's report? Moved by Mr. Simon, second by Mr. Stone. Discussion? Questions for the comptroller? Questions, comments? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? 12-0-0. Item 7 now comes before us. Deja vu all over again. The minutes from the May 18th, 2009 meeting. Is there a motion to approve the May 18th, 2009 minutes?
I move to approve the May 18th, 2000.
Moved by Mr. Krummick. Second by Mr. Simon. Discussion. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? 12-0-0. The June 15th, 2009 minutes. Is there a motion to approve? Moved by Mr. Norton. Second by Mr. Simon. Discussion. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? 12-0-0. Item 8 now comes before us. Officers' report. Mr. Stone?
Nothing.
Ms. Tarkington?
Nothing, thank you.
A couple of things to go over with all of you tonight. First, let me congratulate the Finance Department again. It seems like we just roll past the awards that the Finance Departments receive every year. And again, They were awarded the Certificate of Achievement for Excellence in Financial Reporting to the town of Greenwich by the Government Finance Officers Association of the United States and Canada, GOFA, for its comprehensive annual financial report, otherwise known as the CAFR, year ending June 30th, 2008. Once again, Peter, for your department and for all the work that you do, please extend our congratulations once again. I'm getting harassed by the man who was mixing up CPI and CIP. Excellent.
All I said was, instead of GOFA, it should be Go Figure. I love acronyms.
Well, you will get rid of them. So committee assignments. We have a few committee assignments to either change or add. First of all, Mr. Simon has stepped down from being the BET's representative to the Affirmative Action Advisory Committee, and Mr. Crumick will take his place. So, Mr. Simon, thank you for your service. And Mr. Crumick, best wishes as you locate the committee and do the good work on that committee. I think they meet once a month. So I would say talk with Mr. Simon about who to contact on that committee. Alma Rutgers? Oh, okay. Then we have Stormwater Management Committee. This will be either through the First Selectman's Office, I think through the POCD, there's an application for that, but whatever committee ultimately comes out of that in need, we will be putting Nancy Barton and Jim Campbell on any committee that addresses those two issues. Those two will be the liaisons for stormwater management going forward. The First Selectman has requested that and instituted a committee to look at senior tax relief, including a potential to add a deferral program on top of the program that's already in existence. And for that, the appointment of Nancy Barton and Jim Campbell will also take care of that assignment. With respect to our review of Nathaniel Witherell for the purposes of HDG consulting, as well as to look at where their business plan and the modification of their business plan, in no particular order, Larry Simon, Jeff Raymer, Steve Walco, and Leslie Tarkington. And my understanding is, if you could, is that Mr. Crumick is resigning from his assignment as a Budget Committee member.
That's true, Mr. Chairman. I'm going off the Budget Committee. I have problems with acronyms. Since I can't distinguish between CIP and CPI, I thought it was time to go off the Budget Committee and allow you to name someone else to replace me. That, and this is going to be my last term, and I thought it's very important since the planning for the Budget Committee, for the budget, for next year's budget, starts with the guidelines. It made sense, from my point of view, to have a new member go on there who is going to follow the budget all the way through to next year.
So that we'll get to do this again at our December meeting, but if you can please join me in a round of applause for all of the work that Mr. Crumick has served.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. I know they're happy I'm going off the committee. Go
ahead, Mr. Mason.
If I may, congratulating Mr. Crumick there's a little story behind this. About a year or so ago, I went to Mr. Crumick and I said he wasn't going to run for the Budget Committee. And I said, we have a pretty interesting budget coming up. And I said, you've been at this town government stuff for quite some time. This is going to be truly a year that we are going to really set some history. And I said, would you stay? And he said, okay. And he stayed. And I cannot tell, I mean, from a public perspective or for everybody here, it is a challenging task, the Budget Committee, and obviously the term coming up will be just as challenging. And Mr. Crumick, you will be missed. You have been a great help to me, and I can only personally thank you, and God bless, we're going to miss you.
Thank you.
Mr. Mynarski, did you have something?
Just to follow up, my executive assistant is updating all the assignments for the BET. One simple question, these are all effective immediately?
Yes.
Okay.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman. There's a vacancy on the Budget Committee.
I'm going to get to that. I'm going to get to that. Mr. Mason wanted to say something, so I figured I'd let him. To replace Mr. Crumick on the Budget Committee, the appointment will be of Bill Finger to replace him effective immediately. I think for all the reasons that Ed had just indicated, to help draft the budget guidelines over the summer, and to be prepared to start looking in earnest at the fiscal year 10-11 budget over the summer and then into the fall. Which is a segue to we are not planning an August meeting. I know some committees may need to meet depending on if anything should arise, but at this point we will not meet in August unless something comes up. Obviously, if something does come up, we will plan on having the meeting on the regularly scheduled evening. And so we will proceed in that fashion. We've had a discussion with the comptroller, and right now there doesn't appear to be anything on the horizon that would force us to have a meeting at this point. I would also note
Canceling it or just?
it's canceled right now.
Cancel.
I will be meeting with the first selectman and the moderator to discuss a selection of the retirement board vacancy. If you do have the name of any individuals you think would do a good job in servicing the town on that board, please get those names to me. My sense is this is the first meeting of what could potentially be several meetings regarding this important position within the town. I believe most of you attended this morning's celebration. I will again thank the League of Women Voters for presenting and giving us the information regarding the history of the BET, Elaine Brown for helping the BET out in organizing it, Despina Fosiliotis for even bringing this to our attention, and for Larry Simon's help in this endeavor. Ms. Barton has requested, and I think it's a good idea, so that everyone has a copy of my comments this morning so that you can appreciate and understand the full history of the BET. We'll get those out to you just by email at a later time. Last, with respect to my comments, you should have all received a second draft of what has been marked on the agenda as chairman letter to appointing authorities. That letter has incorporated most, but not all, of the changes that were circulated throughout the last couple days. I appreciate everyone's time and energy in putting into the letter. And so at this time, is there any motion relative to that letter? Ms. Tarkington.
Yes. I move that we adopt the letter and authorize the chairman to sign. I'm going to do it again because it wasn't on the microphone. I move to adopt the letter and authorize the chairman to sign and distribute the letter.
It's been moved by Ms. Tarkington for adoption of a letter. Second by Mr. Mason. It's been Simon?
Was it Simon?
It was Simon.
Okay. It's been moved by Ms. Tarkington, second by Mr. Simon. Discussion. Mr. First Selectman.
Good evening again. First, I want to say thank you for all of your collective efforts and support that you provided to me and to the members of the town government, the professional staff, in moving through the 2009-10 budget process. I recognize that your efforts in planning for 10-11, along with me and the professional staff, have led you to put forward a communication that discusses specifically the area of filling vacancies as a result of the early retirement incentive program. I think that's a wonderful effort in terms of the spirit of cooperation that we fostered over the past several months. But I do want to say for the record that the requirement that town departments, and specifically appointing authorities that don't report to the first selectman, to have to come to the Human Resources Committee of the BET to present what they're presenting to the first selectman's office, as was articulated through your budget message and we've been hearing to for the last several years, certainly prior to my coming into this position. That additional step does add a tremendous amount of burden to them at a time when they are challenged in terms of fulfilling their mission in what they're charged to do. And I think it's important for you, Lise, to be aware that if you have that incorporated, it's likely you'll approve it. I would hope that you would be somewhat sensitive in terms of scheduling, if you're going to go forward with that, their time limitations. I don't say that for me because I am here, I can be available on demand, but recognizing that those departments that have volunteer and independent chairs who are working with professional staff don't have the same luxury that I do, and I think we have to be sensitive to that. Maybe the positions impacted are not many, and therefore the impact on the individuals will not be great, but the charter is clear in terms of once the money that is appropriated through the BET and RTM process is there, that the departments have discretion, and I think they've shown to date, as have the appointing authorities, that they'll be responsible, and I think that needs to be noted. I do not take away your willingness in desire to have that additional input. That's fine. I'm not going to debate or argue it, but I think I would be remiss if I didn't stand up here tonight and say that there has been some concern expressed on the part of some of the department heads who have appointing authorities to that regard of time.
Fair enough. Thank you, Mr. First Selectman. Other comments, questions? Ms. Spartan.
I've had several discussions with various members of this board, including one with the chairman this afternoon. And while I strongly agree that the BET should exercise its authority over the town's financial affairs by reviewing proposed replacements for the vacated positions, and I agree the letter should be sent to the appointing authorities advising them of that, I disagree with several aspects of the letter. First, it restates many aspects of the budget process that we just concluded and which were the subject of extensive debate over what the content of the minutes would be, God save us. And I just don't think we should have to revisit those questions at this stage. Secondly, and relatedly, the draft letter contains a lot of references to what is presumed to be the budget guideline process for the upcoming year. Those guidelines might be a glimmer of imagination in someone's mind, but they have not been committed to writing and circulated to the rest of us for review and comment, much less been approved. And I'm hesitant to approve something that looks like a preliminary budget guideline with only basically half a day to review them. This concern of mine is not an idle one. As most of you know, I was concerned during the latter stages of the budget process, which was ended just a couple of months ago, when some of us tried to raise some issues and were essentially told, well, it's too late. This was the subject of budget guidelines, it was the subject of this, it was the subject of that, and you can't raise it now. That will not happen again this year, at least not without my articulating those issues, which is part of the reason for my objection today. And my third objection actually is less process and more the substance of the letter. It does not contain, and I have not yet seen, the analysis of the costs and benefits of the early retirement incentive program that is addressed in the letter. How much will we save in salary and benefits versus how much we'll pay in increased pension and health care, over what periods of time, which fiscal years, and so forth. I would think that would be important information for us to develop and share before we start to evaluate whether to replace or not replace individual positions. So while I thank the chairman, as I did in my telephone conversation with him earlier, for accepting some of the language changes that I submitted, I still find that the draft that's before us contains my primary objections. If it deleted the first 5 paragraphs, I'd be perfectly happy with the remainder, but the first 5 paragraphs remain, so I am likely to dissent.
Other questions, comments regarding the letter? Mr. Kelly.
Just briefly, I look at this letter as giving notice to the appointing authorities and to the first selectman that we're going to carefully scrutinize any hirings used to replace those who left on early retirement. So it's really, if we're going to hold you accountable at the end of the day, we wanted to put you on notice that it is important to us. And the other thing we did was we made the HR committee available to you. And I think you should use it in that vein, that it's available to you, and you could come explain to the HR committee. The HR committee is then going to have minutes as to whether they thought this position was valuable and should be filled. And that would help you, I would think, on the budget committee end. So, I mean, that's the gist of the letter as far as I'm concerned, and I believe that's the intent of the letter. It's there to give some warning, some notice that it is important to us so that we reflect some of these savings that we hope to gain through this program.
Mr. Mason.
I'd like to agree with Mr. Kelly and recognize some of Ms. Barton's points. At the Budget Committee last week, I think we had an agreement where we wanted to be able to, as quickly as possible, we put the request into the Budget Director to quantify the exact positions that we had and what the cost savings were. At the HR Committee, we followed that up where we've actually asked for everything from the unemployment runs to what the positions are going to be to the exact healthcare runouts for the next 2 years. So this will be information that they'll be gathering over the next period. And I agree with the first selectman. I think he's available at all times to talk about this. But the other appointing authorities, I think it's important we let them know this whole exercise was to be able to set the stage for a prescribed savings over a series of 1, 2, 3 budgets, so we knew where we stand. It's the same with the healthcare, with the new plan that's going in there. So I think the information has been requested, and I think that will be part of our fall budget process to collate that and to formulate what the exact math is. At the same time, allow the appointing authorities to say, I need a position, or I need this position, or I need these 2 positions to become one. And I think that it's just the start of putting all the pieces together.
Ms. Tarkington.
Yes, I'm going to agree. I think also at the HR committee meeting, we said we would be flexible for meetings. We think this is a unique period of time for a unique program. So if meetings are needed, we agreed to add additional meetings to be somewhat flexible, to make sure things move forward appropriately and quickly.
Further comments or questions? All those in favor of approving the letter signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Abstentions? 11, 1, 0. Thank you. Item 9 now comes before us, old business. There is nothing. Item 10 now comes before us, new business. Mr. Porter.
Point of information, Mr. Chairman. Are you going to take public comment at all tonight?
We do not. Our meetings are public meetings, not public hearings. If there's something of importance that you need to discuss, we usually take those either through email directly to the Finance Department or through me. And then if it is an issue that we do take public comment on, we then will schedule a public hearing so that anybody who has a viewpoint on that particular topic then can come and address the BET. I appreciate you being here along with Mr. Quigley. I suspect it was for stormwater management. And if the need arises, we would have a public hearing. Right now, we have, it seems to be, you heard the level of discussion here tonight. There will be, through either the CIP process or through the Flood and Erosion Control Board. And like I said, we're also available if, in fact, we think that there's a need to have greater public input. You're giving me the look like you don't appreciate the response, but that's okay.
My point is very simple, is that what was represented tonight in terms of the amount of public input and the vetting of the process, I think is somewhat misleading, and I don't believe that the process has been vetted. I think the right answer came out, and that was something that everyone pushed hard for once this issue got on your radar screen, which was at the beginning of the last budget year. And given that, because of the lateness of this whole initiative, in order to move forward with the request, it wasn't until last week that we put together a white paper, which we circulated in draft form to some of you. And I would suggest, particularly because Mr. Campbell and Ms. Barton are willing to give time to this effort, that it would be well for us to complete that draft and make sure that those of you who have, perhaps not in the amount of detail that Mr. Quigley and I do on this project, come to appreciate it. Just a simple last point, all along since this issue came to a head, there's been a desire to demonstrate to the citizens, irrespective of where they live, that the problem was understood and part of the problem was going to be addressed on a priority basis. And we accomplished that tonight. I think, I'm not sure what the $250,000 is being spent for the simple reason that if you just take Church Road alone, that's $1.3 million is the CDM estimate. And of that 1.3, 25% is field study work that has to be done, and 25% is contingency. So I'm really not sure if you know, politely, if you know what you spent.
We'd be happy to share the blue papers with you that were submitted for the application, so that you can take a look at what the application was for and the money and the information that we have that supported the application. I will say that I think the BET is well aware of the situation. I think we addressed it here tonight, and that public input, if this body decides to offer a public hearing on this, will be properly noticed and afforded all parties to participate, those both for and against, so that we have a full conversation about the issue. Mr. Van Keisling.
I wanted to thank the board for its sensitivity on this issue and its support of the Flood and Erosion Control Board, who have made every effort to be open. I would point out that there is a very devoted following this board has of 1 or 2 or 3 people who have been giving considerable public assistance and input.
Okay, Mr. Quigley, I must stop the conversation. It's not properly noticed. We try very hard to follow process, although even the chairman messes up once in a while in terms of that. And I think it's vitally important that if we're going to have a public conversation about this, that we properly notice it, that we allow people to come forward and speak, both for and against, that the Flood and Erosion Control Board, or DPW, still be present for the conversation. And we will do that if, in fact, the BET thinks that needs to be done.
That's a point of order I'd like to ask. You made a suggestion tonight. How does that process take place?
Well, we have 2 liaisons now who are working on this, and in fact, they can make a recommendation. We obviously, the first selectman is here, not only hearing your concerns tonight, but I'm sure taking in the advisement of the Flood and Erosion Control Board, and we will leave it up to those fine people to in some regards, dictate the process. If in fact it's needed, the BET is receptive to such ideas. Item 11 now comes before us, and I would ask if, Maria, if you could take care of the pouring of the toast. I just have a few last comments to make regarding our 100-year anniversary.
Can I make an observation, Mr. Walko?
Sure.
As a member of the BET, I'm not listed in the book.
You're listed backwards, actually.
I know, there's a Kelly Williams.
There's a Kelly William. I saw that myself.
Just an observation. I don't want to change.
Oh, it's going to be changed.
I don't want any money spent.
Highlighted and...
Excuse me, I served with Kelly Williams. And you're no Kelly Williams.
Is he supposed to be here?
No. I've lost it here. If I may, if you will allow me just 2 minutes of time. I think it's important for those who didn't, either in the audience who either didn't attend this morning or, in fact, are hearing this for the first time through the good work of GCTV. And it's just 2 quick paragraphs from the comments that were made this morning. As I have stated numerous times before, the BET is much more than dollars and cents. It is about people, our fellow residents who are passionate about schools, fire stations, sidewalks, beaches, parks, parking garages, or preventing them, open space, neighborhood character, and quality of life. In other words, we want it all. We want to be able to grow up here, raise our children here, retire here, and continue to pay as little in taxes as possible. And that is the job of your BET. The current economic climate has not diminished the resolve of many to ensure that the quality of life we have all come to expect remains intact. As a town, we must decide the fate of several large-scale projects, such as the Backcountry Fire Station, utilization of the Havemeyer Building and Old Town Hall, renovation of Central Fire Station, the Eastern Greenwich Civic Center, and most notably Nathaniel Witherell's Project Renew, and this is not a plant, this was in here before, stormwater management. While it seems as though the capital list is never-ending and the resources are dwindling, I remain confident that the BET will now, and for the next 100 years, serve the town well to ensure the financial stability of our great town. To all of this I say cheers, job well done, happy 100 years. To that, if I may, to the BET. Cheers.
Chairman.
Mr. Crumick?
Any significance to the fact that he's here and it's 100 years?
We knew you were coming, so we had to offset the...
Mr. Chairman, I just want to note for the record, when we celebrated the 75th anniversary of the RTM, it cost $50,000. We're here celebrating the 100th anniversary of the BET with 2 bottles of champagne donated by Larry Simon from his daughter's wedding.
Is there a motion to adjourn?
Yes, motion to adjourn.
Thank you. Cheers.
And the second